university, as you know, plays a really significant role in the city. The students of the university are part of the social life of the city, and we're the second largest employer in the region. But I think that all too often, one thinks of the university as being like our memory of school. That is to say, the teachers kind of were permanent, and the students came and went. But in a way, I think that's absolutely wrong. The students are a core part of the university, and they remain a part of the university after they've left through our alumni programs. And our staff, they have permanent positions, but they don't always stay at the university forever. They can leave as well, and they can go on and do great things, just like our students do. And for both of these groups, the staff and the students, the more that we can retain them in our region, here in Bath, the better that will be for the future of the city of Bath. So I think that trying to keep more of our graduates here, whether those are graduating with undergraduate degrees or with postgraduate degrees, and the more that we can keep our staff here, if they decide not to be in academia anymore, they nonetheless can stay in the region and contribute to the city and to the region, I think the better that it will be. So it's a particular pleasure for me to welcome two such people here this evening. I've got Andrew Chalmers and I've got David Kelly. So starting with David, David's an alumnus of the university. He was a student. He's now the founder and the CEO of Storm Consultancy. He's a well-known figure in the Bath and Bristol tech startup and scale-up community and one of the founders of the Bath Digital Festival. He's also chair of the TechSpark Community Board in Bath, and he is a mentor and advisor to the University of Bath Enterprise team. He's also, I should say, a very good friend of the university who supports us in many ways. Andy Chalmers was my colleague at university. He was an academic, but he's now the CEO of CiteAb, and he also is a visiting lecturer at the university. He conceived the idea of a citation-based antibody search engine. He co-founded CiteAb, and he now leads the company in its mission to help scientists and suppliers by collecting reagent citation data. So thank you to both of us for joining us here this evening. And it seems a bit like an inquisition, because I've got some questions written down and I'm going to ask them. I know you're going to tell us what you want to say in response, and I encourage members of the audience, please to chip in or raise your hand if you find it too difficult to chip in as well. So can I start by asking you to please describe CiteAb, what it is, and how it came about?
I think, Andy, you take this one, and then I'll score you afterwards as to how well you've done it.
Yeah, so CiteAb is, I guess, as its core, search engine for scientists. So if you're a cancer researcher, you're wanting to study a particular type of cancer, look at the potential drivers for that cancer, then you'll almost certainly be designing an experiment, choosing the products, which are often antibodies, that you buy and then you use for your experiment. CiteAb makes it much easier and faster to pick the right reagents, the right antibodies for the experiment. And what this does is avoids researchers picking the wrong products for their experiments, which they may then waste weeks or months of time before, and can even lead like entire research programs astray. So that's what CiteAb does in a nutshell.
So I mean, my take is that Andy's given you a beautiful philanthropic overview of how CiteAb supports the world and accelerates science. My take is that CiteAb is an incredibly clever data business. It machine reads tens of millions of academic papers, scraping content around what experiments have been done by whom, what the outcomes were, what machinery was used, where they're geographically based, how they're interlinked, and as a kind of third party without any bias, it's able to present all of that data, yes, through a search engine for the good of academics, but the commercial driver of CiteAb and the clever piece is that the life science companies who actually supply all of the reagents, the antibodies, the machinery, all the rest of it, they didn't, prior to CiteAb, have access to this global view of data in terms of what was going on, who was doing what, where, how they were succeeding, where they weren't succeeding. So commercially speaking, CiteAb is a tool to make sure that those organisations can be significantly more efficient in their own commercial objectives, whether or not that's the drugs that they go on to develop, the reagents, I should say, that they go on to develop, or frankly just the areas of research, the countries they decide to move into next. So there are very much two sides, and I actually feel like one of the reasons why CiteAb's worked incredibly well is that we have got a very good complementary team between the commercial understanding of how and why CiteAb works so well as a commercial going concern, yet has this beautiful philanthropic arm that is essentially for free helping to save lives. So it's a really lovely example of academia coming together with commerce and providing a business that is not only viable but profitable in doing so.
So can we just go into that a little bit more? Because actually, even before you started speaking, I'd identified this as the most interesting element of Andy's response, because to be honest, he kind of still speaks like an academic. But actually,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Most academics, if they'd identified the need for this activity, they wouldn't formulate it as a business. But the thing that makes it work is that it's a business, because it requires funding and it has to be sustainable. So how is it, perhaps I could address this in the first instance to Andy, I mean, how is it that you went down that commercial route, which was really the only way that it could be successful?
Yeah, and I think it was totally key from the beginning that it was, that we had that commercial approach to be able to drive the funding, because I think we could potentially have applied for grant funding, but it would always been very short term, and it would just have taken the money away from the research projects. And so how did it happen? I think, I won't go too far back, but it came up with the idea for the search engine as a philanthropic tool to help scientists. Met Dave and his partner Adam, who's a computer scientist, and so we're talking about different skill sets, and so Dave brought the commercial, Adam brought the computer science, and I brought the biology. And I think having those different mindsets, looking at the same product, allowed us to identify both the commercial opportunity and the primary, original use case. And the key thing, I think, is for the way it works, is that all the data that we collect for the commercial data that we license is exactly the same data that powers the search engine. So each license that we sell that encourages us to improve the data is fed directly into the search engine. And the search engine then helps scientists, but also is a fantastic shop window commercially, because all the companies will also use it and then approach us for data. So there's a really nice circular sort of feedback.
So it really was about the combination of the individual contributions that you both had to the formation of the vision.
Yes. The story I tell, so, never let the facts get in the way of a good story and embellish, is that this all started because Andy told a whopper of a lie, which was, we're going to build this platform. I think it should house between 10 and 15,000 antibodies.
50,000.
No, I'm sure it's 50. But the prototype was built with that amount of data in mind, and I believe that part way into the testing, we hadn't even launched, we had a few 100,000 antibody products listed, and we barely turned the dials up to 1, and we had so many ideas about how we were going to collect this vast quantity of data that would ultimately underpin both, well, at the time, just the philanthropic side. And it wasn't a fib, it was Andy making a perfectly reasonable, or, it was a guess at the time. It was the delta between what we assumed we could get hold of and the ease with which we could actually cover pretty much the entirety of an entire sector's data that made us think there's a very strong chance that there's a commercial driver behind this, because we are able to access a resource with very clever technology, but ultimately at incredibly low cost. And so there was a little bit of kind of outreach at that point to some of the... There was one key piece of the puzzle here, which is the university's REF framework. REF is Research...
Excellence Framework.
There you go, Research Excellence Framework. And my understanding of it is that certain case studies from the universities are put forward through this to show impact.
So the university is funded through various mechanisms, but one of the mechanisms is that its research is assessed in this research excellence framework, which is a national exercise which assesses every university which is research active within the UK. They're all put into a big competition, and then those that are doing the best get the most funding. And so that's what is being referred to here. And one of the elements of that assessment is in how much impact has your research had on the UK economy, the person in the street, social well-being, the health of the population. So these impact case studies are really important for the university, and so that's what is being referred to here.
Absolutely, and it was the research into, we now have this data, to the companies who exist in this space, what impact do you think this could have? The results we were getting back were, this is game-changing. You know, this doesn't exist anywhere else. When can we have it and how much will it cost? All of which are excellent drivers for, we should think of a pricing model pretty damn quick. And so it was through that lens of trying to understand the impact that we realized that it was beyond the philanthropic impact and there was a potential commercial impact. So yeah, that piece of the puzzle I think was very important. And it's a really nice way of driving, again, or demonstrating the combination between the commerciality and the academia of two ways of looking at impact. And I know Andy is as well, and it's incredibly proud that even though CiteAb is nearly a decade into its journey, it still holds those two things beautifully in tension. It hasn't ever gone, well, we'll just not bother with the philanthropic piece, we're just going to focus on the commerciality. So yeah, I'm certainly proud that that still exists.
So we're all proud of it, I have to be honest, although obviously people like me have played no role in it. Nonetheless, we see it as something which is here in Bath, and it's world leading. And I'm sure that there are many people in Bath who have no idea that CiteAb exists. And what a funny thing to find in little old Bath. So why is it actually that you are here in Bath?
I think it came, there's good fortune in two directions, I think. So you were talking about students moving away. So I was a student here, I did my PhD in Bath, moved to Cambridge for postdoctoral work, and then came back to take up an academic position. I knew the department was a really strong department in life sciences, which is the area that I was working in. And then when I had the idea for CiteAb, I knew a lot about biology, but zero about web development or like text mining, machine reading, like large literature. And so, but the university is a great place to ask around and seek advice. And I was really introduced to Dave and his co-founder, who came to the Bath for different reasons, I suppose, really, or to study, but for different reasons. And that, I think Bath just really worked really well for us because it brought the right people into one place and had the right environment within the university. I always think that other universities, but in CiteAb may not have got out the door and been supported. I think Bath's maybe more open-minded, and it wasn't without some fights, and there's people in the audience that helped us get it out of the university in terms of starting as a spin-out. But I think that the university environment is really supportive of collaborations and interactions.
So obviously it was a good decision because it's planned out, but I wonder if I could just go to you, David, because as I mentioned, you're kind of in the startup community and you're involved in other emerging and fledgling businesses. I wonder if you would pick out any distinctive characteristics of Bath as a city or as a community which you think are valuable in trying to promote the growth of new businesses in Bath.
Yeah, there are a number, and I wouldn't go as far as to say they are, they don't necessarily make Bath the best place globally to do anything, because there are going to be arguments for funding being significantly better, frankly, anywhere in the US. That's not a Bath problem, that's a UK problem. And there are arguments to say that the scale of cities can often add. But when you do look at what we have in Bath, there are a few things. It's often not referred to as a university city, but in my view it is. We've got two incredibly good universities, non-competing universities, that are complementary, that at the time, I mean, we're casting back now to wherever it was, 2012, 2014, that sort of time, were working reasonably well together, and as far as I can see, that has only gone from strength to strength for those organisations. So when you're starting a business and you're looking for a diversity of talent at a high level, that's a really big indicator of it's a driving force. And the second is essentially how the tight geography of Bath allows for a collaborative overlay rather than a competitive overlay. And I remember having some conversations with colleagues in Bristol who would often say, we're jealous of what you have in Bath, in the technology community, because somehow you're all on the same team. You are all supportive of each other, you're all peers, you're all friends, whereas in Bristol we seem to be cliques. And I think it's simply that Bristol is large enough for tribes and cliques to form, whereas Bath actually is small enough geographically that we are held largely together. And again, that's an exceptional and fairly unique circumstance. It's when you look at some of the biggest output factors in Bath. So for example, and this is now quite an old statistic, which I don't believe has been updated, but it was a GWE Business West report. The technology and digital sector in Bath added more than tourism and retail combined to the city for 3 years running, which most people kind of beggars belief. But behind this Georgian facade that you see are some absolute world-beating, innovative technology businesses. And I think that's what I got a peek at whilst I was at university, was some of these businesses that were tucked away. So it was a really exciting place to join. And I mean, the final one is great, but geographically it's ideally, much like Bristol. You know, you've got the capital of Wales one way, the capital of England the other way. The southwest is at your feet, the north isn't actually too far away. You are beautifully located and in a place where people want to come and be. We've really ridden the wave of the work-life balance being in a city that's so much around well-being and health. So many little pieces form part of that puzzle that add to the mix for me.
So you've mentioned Bristol several times actually as a comparator, and obviously that's a dominant force in our region, and I obviously don't want us to compete with them, but they are an interesting comparator. So I want to get back to you in a moment and just ask you about any downsides that you see about this kind of activity in Bath. But just while we're on the positives about why is a good place to start a business, I just wonder whether there's anyone in the audience that thinks there are obvious answers to that question which haven't come out.
I'm sorry, but you've got to compete with
Bristol.
I mean, the whole problem in the UK has been we're seduced by Oxford and Cambridge, the golden triangle, and the rest of us have just been around it. There's been talk about having this, I don't even know, we never got around to a name because it was meant to be Bath, Bristol, Exeter, and even down to Plymouth. They were talking about the rest of the country. So the question now is, do we go by ourselves here in Bath, or do we try and form up? And Bristol's rubbish at tech transfer and starting. I've got countless clients who've moved out of Bristol, despite the efforts of Science Creates, who are very good, but people are moving to Nottingham, you know, or Oxford and Cambridge and so on, whereas this is a completely undiscovered gem here in Bath. And I do, sorry, I'm going on a wee bit, but just very quickly, I mean, I do work with clusters all over Europe in life sciences. And I've been promoting Lithuania recently, and then Austria, for example. But Bath never comes up on people's radar, except when I say I live in Bath. Oh, I studied there. Oh, we've got some collaborations maybe going on. Yeah, really, we've got a chance here, and we should go for it.
Good. So I didn't mean to say that we should be second fiddle to Bristol. I just meant the competition is not Bristol. The competition is the Golden Triangle. Yeah, it may well be Lithuania. It may well be Silicon Valley. I'm just saying let's not get too parochial in thinking about, you know, where the competition is. But just on Bath, any other positives that anyone have? No, we've maxed that out. All right.
Another.
Let's hear.
Which is, I've moved here from Oxford, so I have a bit of a feeling
Welcome.
about ecosystem. I have no regrets at all. But increasingly, a lot of the companies in Oxford space are saying, actually, if we're not related to the university, we need to move down to more like Milton Park, to Didcot. And actually, you start thinking about network effects. Well, actually, we're pretty close to Didcot too. And then there's Bristol and you know, Cardiff and London, as you point out. Perhaps our geography being so small, relative to Silicon Valley, say, that is actually a massive positive. Yeah. There's direct, fast trains in every direction. It's really good. And the people can relocate and move around. Go ahead.
It's a really interesting subtle observation, which is the difference in the importance of place versus brand. So we're moving to Didcot, but we're still Oxford.
Yes. I worked for a company that was having them actually.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. And so there's probably an entirely different conversation, or a much longer one, around are we championing Bath the place or Bath the brand? Because do I mind if someone's actually in Trowbridge, but they say we're a Bath-based international life science company? That's great for Bath, because when they say, well, which university's around there, boom. And again, I mean, Silicon Valley has definitely had that. You know, essentially it's been, which is the next field we can build on? We're definitely still part of Silicon Valley, and in a minute they're going to be in bloody Texas. And we're still in Silicon Valley because we've stretched it all the way across. So that in itself it's an interesting observation. Yeah, and let's not go any further because I said it could take up hours in the weeds. One observation I did have as well, we have a lot of high net worth individuals in Bath. Starting businesses is not corporate funding. We're not talking about institutional funding. We're not talking about PE or VC. Starting businesses is SEIS or EIS, which are basically very tax-efficient vehicles for individuals to fund businesses. It's friends and family. It's 10,000 here, 25,000 here, maybe an angel with 100,000. So you need a high concentration of those people who are willing to invest in those small, very fledgling businesses, because the alternative is competing with the other 400 trillion businesses in Innovate UK, or trying and keeping your fingers crossed that there's a research project you can piggyback on through an institution. So having a really good high net worth concentration actually is a massive boon to any city. And I've got involvement in BPEC in Bristol Private Equity Investors, and AIB, Angel Investors Bristol. And you look at these both Bristol-branded organisations, and you scan down the list of addresses, and you go, well, we might as well meet in the pub in Bath, because more than 2/3 of you bloody live here. Yeah. But Bristol happens to have managed to grab that slice of brand for that's where the investors are, even though we all get on a sodding train and go over there. So, yeah, it's another...
So just picking up on the point of Trowbridge, obviously nothing wrong with Trowbridge, but you mentioned it, and it came off your tongue pretty easily, actually, as if, you know, thinking about the pros and cons.
Sure.
So I guess maybe your answer is, well, Trowbridge is a part of Bath. But could I just ask you about what might it be that would drive a new business to be in Trowbridge rather than in Bath City?
A few years ago, I'd have said it was the high-speed connectivity. I live in a tiny little village south of Bath, where there are cows opposite and fields behind, and I have 1,000 megabyte internet to my door. It's wonderful. Meanwhile, I'd be coming into the office for a massive downgrade, where we'd be getting 60 across 35 of us. So there was a period of time where actually moving slightly outside of the heritage city in which we live and the restrictions there that come with it. But actually, I'm delighted to say that's now been relatively squashed.
Yes.
I think there are certainly challenges. Let's put my little political correctness hat on a moment before we make a comment live on a live stream. There are challenges in the council around how they view property and their propensity for short-term versus long-term thinking. Where there are new developments outside of the city, they're straight into the long-term thinking and therefore can make it far more attractive to businesses in the same ways you did see in Temple Quarter in Bristol, where, for example, there were very long rate-free periods, very reasonable square footage charges, whereas for various perfectly legitimate reasons, office space in central Bath is being used for short-term propping up of balance sheets rather than long-term thinking of development of prime retail space. And again, I know there are developments going on in Bath at the moment to start to redress that balance, but that has been a reason, and I would say still probably is currently a reason why it's tricky.
I think that's likely to remain. I mean, as you mentioned, Bath is an exceptional city, really, with a wonderful heritage, and it would be, a travesty if that were ignored. So it is always a consideration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else?
The question was about why people might move.
Well, what are the downsides of starting a small business in Bath?
The positive, I think, we've touched on it, but certainly for CiteAb, it's been really key, is the graduates that are coming out of Bath and Bristol as well. We've done extremely well out of hiring graduates from Bath and from Bristol and in Cardiff, and not just there, and I think the fact that it's such a great place to live and you have such great graduates coming out is a real advantage to us.
Yes.
And then I guess like a downside for CiteAb, it's a tech company, so it doesn't matter that we're in Bath. We need an internet connection, and half the team might be working in South Wales most of the time and come into Bath or in Bradford-on-Avon or Trowbridge or wherever. But if we were a life science company and it needed lab space, then at least this might be changing. But certainly when CiteAb was spun out, I don't think there was any startup lab space in Bath. So then you would have to go to Bristol or to Cardiff. So that's not something that affected CiteAb, but would have affected spin-outs for a lot of my life science department.
Yes, that's right. And I think actually the situation there has got much better, because notwithstanding your comments about Bristol, the reality is historically our spin-outs in the life sciences would have gone to Newcastle or to South Wales. More recently they can go to Bristol, which is kind of like, isn't that a part of Bath? They can carry on living there. So I want to just get back to that thing about the formation of the business actually, and try and understand, you said quite glibly, well, we were talking and we discussed the various options, but there's a whole story there which I haven't really heard about how it was that as an academic with an idea, who was a scientist, you ended up talking, the two of you in a room with your colleague as well. So how did that happen? I mean, were you personal friends, or did someone match you up?
So I asked in the RDSO, so Research Development Support Office, and we obtained a small grant, I think it was EPSRC originally, and funding to build a prototype website. As I say, with me, with very zero understanding of how you build a website, and asked for advice in the Research Development Support Office, and they said, oh, you should go and talk to Dave and Adam, and actually there was also a colleague that was working with you at the time, whose name
One of my colleagues.
it was somebody that was, so it was very fortuitous, because it wasn't even directly to Dave and Adam. It was like
Mike Ellis, maybe?
Yes, Mike. So yes, it was an introduction to Mike, who then brought me to you and Adam.
Yeah.
And I spoke to a few different companies, and talking to Dave and Adam were the company that understood not what I thought I wanted to build, but actually what the project was supposed to do, and therefore what was best to build, and that just set us off on the right footing, I think.
Yeah, so it was some advice which you followed, which turned out to be quite propitious, really.
Absolutely,
really good advice when you look back on it.
Yeah, and I've got no doubt a different company might have built us a perfectly fine prototype, but we would then have run out of steam very fast, because we didn't really, I didn't have the skill set to then commercialise it.
Yeah, so that buy-in probably was really critical as well, wasn't it? So what made you decide to, because obviously you both were busy, I mean, this was not your job at the time, but obviously a decision to dedicate resource to this activity. I'm particularly interested from the commercial side. How did you make that work?
I don't know if this is true of all people in business, but I certainly have the business equivalent of a spidey sense. If I have 5 conversations, one of them will leave me that tingle of, oh, that's interesting, that could go somewhere. I don't know if anyone in the room or online is a really keen chess player, but the world champion at the moment, a gent called Magnus Carlsen, he says, I'm not the most studied, I'm not the best at thinking deep into chess, but over the years I've just developed a sense of what the next move needs to be played, and I can do that quicker than anyone else in the world, and that's why I'm number one. And in my incredibly small and probably not particularly comparative given the achievement of Magnus Carlsen, but that is exactly what I felt when we'd had the conversation with Andy, just that lingering sense of, I've sat through 50 conversations, 80 conversations so far this year, this is the one that's exciting. And you can't always put your finger on exactly why. And I think that for me, the challenge actually was, at the time, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Bath would have been Glynis Breakwell. True or not, the feedback to us was the university might not want to spin this out because Glynis is used to seeing spin-outs that are things, widgets, that you can physically hold and have got IP. Like, I don't know if that's true, but that is what ended up with us. Whereas we're talking about a piece of software. And so going to the university and saying, we only want 50 grand to start spinning this out, you can't do anything with 50, we sneeze and spend 50 grand around here. That needed re-roofing and that was more than 50 grand, so you can't start a business. And Storm put a similar amount in, which is how the spin out was coming. But I mean, I think it really came down to, two people who are actually here. Graham and Miles were involved in that process of the commercialisation from the university's point of view, and incredibly grateful that both of them saw what we saw and said, this actually, in terms of cost to risk ratio, isn't bad. Like, it's only 50 grand, and there's actually quite a good upside here. And so a multi-prong attack to say this is worth spinning out from the university, even though there isn't a lot of precedent for software turning into a business. Again, we're talking a long time ago now, so perhaps now there is. Well, we are the precedent now, so great. That was actually the biggest hurdle to overcome, because the university could have said, no, we're keeping Mr. Chalmers here, and that's it, it's tough luck, and that's all our intellectual property, so no way. And we could have, the whole thing could have died at that point. I don't know if I'll ever know how close it came, because I wasn't involved in those conversations. I'd probably say there's at least one gentleman back there who can tell us exactly how close it came, and whether or not he had to end up on his knees saying, go on, give it a go. But it did.
You can ask him afterwards.
Yeah, we will ask him afterwards.
Just on the question of intellectual property, I mean, I think you're quite right to pick up that distinction that the universities' spin-out activities are often based on technology which can be manifest, and one of the reasons is that that technology is often easy to protect in the form of patents.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about the intellectual property which underlies CiteAb, and how that's identified, or how that value is?
It's a sore point for Andy at the moment, so I think you should go on this one.
I mean, a lot of it is we use trade secret because we've written the code. It's entirely unique, so it's protected that way.
And so, before you wrote the code, there was no intellectual property, no kind of idea which is something which could be protected.
No, Paul, I don't think we would have struggled, and we got advice at the time, struggled to protect the idea. Okay. Interestingly, we've kind of, and so we deliberately didn't try and, even when we had some code write patterns initially. What we've since discovered is that and mainly because the UK EU patent rules are quite tough around software, it seems like the US is completely opposite, and you can just write whatever you like, and you're likely to get.
Oh, they give them out like toilet paper in the US. So, it's wonderful.
Which is a real, that distinction is a real pain, because it means that we are not having to, but basically are really having to write patents in the US to protect some of our software, because. It's possible there, and therefore we need to do it.
Yes, we've coloured this button green. Has anyone checked whether that's patented in the US? Oh, look, someone's got a patent on a green button in the US. We'll change it. It's quite frustrating.
So as we're growing, we're protecting. We are moving to the more traditional way of protecting IP.
Yes. Okay. So perhaps two questions before I get on to the last one, though. This is a general question: whether you've got any advice for the university or for the city as to how we can stimulate a more dynamic startup economy. I mean, it's dynamic now, but we can always do more. And what do you think would be the key steps which either the university or the city could take to try and stimulate that?
Yes, I have lots of advice. How long do we have? Do you want to go first?
Realistic advice.
Yeah. As a biologist, I'm already lab space for me. It's like small lab space for startups, I think. Yeah. Just to house people for a bit longer in Bath.
Yes, thank you.
So I think the university is uniquely positioned to see a lot of ideas very early on, all created by intelligent people in a safe space. So if you draw a comparison between someone who's got a 9-to-5 job wherever they are, and they have got a side idea, the amount of time and energy and money they can invest into validating and checking that idea, versus someone who is doing a research project at a university where potentially a huge amount of their time and resource and commercial funding is going into validating whatever they're doing. There's an uneven playing field, and those ideas emerging from universities statistically are therefore in the upper quartile of those likely to succeed. Now, if you are the university with that view, my personal approach would be to say, as long as it doesn't form a cornerstone of the university's funding requirements, and I appreciate there are pressures with universities at the moment, But wouldn't it be amazing if a university said, look, we will create a large pot of money that will invest, and we'll only ever try to make, I don't know, pick a number, 3 times, 5 times our investment as a return. We know things could go on to be worth billions, but that's not why we're here. We'll make a return, and the reason why we want to make a 3 or 5 times return is to put it back into that pot so that we can do 3 to 5 times more of these things next time. So we're going for quantity. So, you know, CiteAb is an example. The university puts £50,000 in, could quite happily be bought out for £500,000 today with no concern. Is CiteAb worth more than that? Probably. Will it go on to be worth more than that in the future? Almost certainly. But if the university said, yeah, but we've got ideas waiting to go, so let's get that 500,000 back now and pump it into a bunch more ideas and a bunch more ideas. And universities essentially operate funds. They operate their own competing venture fund, which isn't driven by the same bordering on greedy nature that commercial venture funds are. I think that at the moment, universities, and I've seen Bristol especially doing this, they hold on to the shareholding, they hold on because they see it getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I won't mention any names, but 2 in Bristol went, yep. The university could have had a colossal amount of money out of a couple of them 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and we could have hundreds of millions more of investment now in the Bristol startup scene because they did. And the thing is, they didn't need to take that risk because that isn't what they were there for. That isn't their modus operandi. So yeah.
Thank you. Anything from the audience on this? Things the city or the university could do to promote a more dynamic spin-out environment within the city? Go on.
I think they could provide better space for spin-outs. Hello, David. I think that at the moment we're sat almost on top of one of Bar University's innovation, the studio just behind us. We've got the innovation centre, but actually there's often quite a lot of hoops for people to go through to get into those spaces. And I don't think we do enough to encourage that sort of garage network where people can just get together, bandy ideas around, perhaps borrow a desk for a couple of weeks and get going. And I think we could do more to create fertile environments for small startups to get to know one another and to grow. There's a lovely quote by a man who leads a lot of tech communities in the States who says that as an ecosystem manager, as he calls himself, he likes to make places where ideas get together to have sex. And I think that it's something, yes, it makes innovation sound sexy, but I think it is actually a great idea. If we can get people with good ideas together, 2 good ideas can be a great idea, but you need to provide the space for them. And as they start to grow, you've got to provide the commercial space for them to grow into. And we're not doing that. We're turning it into flats or other things. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So that really resonates with me. I think I completely understand the point about the flats. I think that the city is undergoing a renaissance at the moment. And I think now is the time for these comments really to land. I've got a junior colleague down the corridor from me. He's got a business which is in my department. I had to tell him recently there's not going to be space for you from April. And he's found space in the city. It's a lab-based activity, and it's the first time, actually, that I've known such a lab-intensive activity with a really small number of people find a landing space in the city. So I'm very positive about that. It's not in the university's innovation centre, but I think that's good for the innovation centre because that's demonstrating that there's actually competition to try and attract people because they need to have a competitive offer. So I'm optimistic that we're going to address that in the years to come.
So they come all the way down here, take space in the city of Bristol to do it there. So maybe we should go up to Oxford and do that.
Or Didcot.
Didcot, yeah.
Yeah.
Just try and do it better here.
Yes, thank you. Anything else? Okay, my last comment for our guests then. So the last question is about the future of CiteAb. Where do you see it going?
We can do our double act as well, because I'm thinking immediately science and helping scientists.
I was on a yacht.
You were out of here.
No.
Yeah, I think we're just build the tools that we can build to help scientists. We're really just starting on that journey, I think, and also we're reaching hundreds of thousands of scientists, but there's many more that don't know about us yet. So there's a sort of word of mouth thing. But in particular, we're building new search tools to help scientists, and so that's just continuing on that journey of structuring more and more information that is currently so unstructured and unhelpful, and helping researchers make better decisions.
And so would that be manifest as new products? Is that what you're saying? Or is it about new tools within existing products?
Both.
Okay.
So there's ideas around both. Ideas, but prototypes and so that's where I think there's just such a lot more we can do.
And when I said, where do you see it going? Just going back to the Trowbridge question.
Oh, in terms of...
Do you think of leaving the city?
That's an interesting question. Comes back to the flats, though. Flats aren't always bad, because one of the problems we've got is that we hire young graduates, and even though our office is in Bath, actually probably 9 out of 10 of them are in Bristol now. So you think, okay, well, should we be in Bristol? But actually, it works. Bath works so well for us. There's no plan to move. But maybe we need flats and co-working space.
Good, thank you. Dave.
I'd echo everything that Andy's just said. That I think there's a couple of kind of technical potentials that CiteAb could go on to fulfill. So the advent of AI has thrown some interesting curveballs into the mix. The fact that AI uses any data source, or generic AI will use any data source to try and formulate its musings is a worry, and is also its Achilles heel, and the reason why it can sometimes think there are 8 days in the week. More trained and specific AI, which you don't necessarily even know where they're being used or what they're being used for, will often be trained on very specific, vetted data sources that are essentially considered points of truth. So these might be like census data would be considered a point of truth. And I'd love to think that CiteAb could kind of ascend to that level of being a point of truth for certain types of data within the life science industry, such that, in the same way as we arguably stood on the shoulders of the giants before, I'd love to think that there's a whole layer of innovation that could come by people standing on the shoulders of the data that we've built, and be using them in ways to do good in the world beyond that we can imagine. I'd really hope those people aren't competing competitively with us in a commercial sense, but that would be phenomenal. And I also genuinely feel that the inflection curve for us has been interesting. We launched not long after a financial crisis, and we've been through a few very tricky times with the organisation and the environment it's working in. But when you look at the dynamics of the organisation and the maturity of the organisation, you can't help but feel we're not more than a couple of years away from being not just a bit of a success story, but a phenomenal success story in the city. And I mean, I for one am really looking forward to being on the bus as that happens.
Good, we're all looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So are there outstanding questions or comments from the audience, please?
Or anyone in the camera.
Online,
Or online, exactly,
What would you say has been the biggest lesson for you in terms of moving from academia into the commercial space?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing was that such a lot of the skill set of an academic is transferable, transfers so well, because we're used to talking passionately about things and effectively selling our research, working with people, working with budgets. But at the same time, there's such a lot that I didn't know, and so having co-founders or in my case, lucky to have co-founders, but advisors from different backgrounds, I think is key. So there's no way. So I would definitely recommend any academic looking at doing a spin out. You need that breadth. So having Dave's commercial background, having Adam's computer science background, knowing how to navigate a startup really was absolutely key. And then I think it's just lots and lots of. I've just continued to learn as we've gone along, really, in lots of different ways, which is made it really interesting.
It's an interesting one. So I would say I've only met a very small handful of academics that I think would make great CEOs. And there are a number of reasons for that, but I think one that impressed me with Andy the most is academia is, not always, but often, it's a continuation of essentially your 5th birthday. That's kind of when you enter education, and you're in education, and then you decide you've done university, but you're not quite ready to leave, so there's some more education, and then you teach, and then you're still in education, and it goes on and on. So you've never been in another world. For someone like Andy to have risen to the position he is, with the security he had, the pay, and go, I might start a business. That takes... When I started a business, I was unmarried, didn't have kids, didn't have a mortgage. Parents both alive if there was ever an incredibly privileged position. What an incredibly privileged position to be in, to be able to start a business. And that's not to say Andy hasn't had that privilege, but the leap that Andy took to do what he did it makes what I did pale in significance. And so it's not just do they have the right personality traits, but it's you were getting off a very nice bus at the time to move on to our slightly rickety old banger when it started. So, I've got huge amounts of admiration for any academic that's willing to take that leap of faith in taking their research and commercializing it.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Hi, yeah, great talk. I was wondering with the Bath University, how established is the processes of commercializing, essentially intellectual property? Because I was really surprised that any of that actually happened, to be honest, because when I've tried to work with my old universities, everything would take so long for anything to happen. And I know, I just want to rather make something, but you can't do that under the restrictions. So is there quite an established process for this now? How does it all work?
Yeah, so perhaps I could take that. We've got the head of our tech transfer office sitting over here, so you can talk to him as well. But I would have to take responsibility, I think, for the university's processes. And I think there are two things. The one is you said, how established are they? And the other is you gave the impression that if they were established, they might be quick. But actually, the opposite is true. The establishment is what slows it down. So there is a complex governance process around establishing spin-outs, financial conflicts of interest, the ownership of the intellectual property, the rights of the inventors and of possible founders who are non-inventors, etc. So it is quite a complex framework. I think that a year ago yesterday, the government published a spin-out review, which was delivered by an academic and a non-academic, both very eminent people within the UK. And that was a review of the spin-out processes at universities across the UK. And it made recommendations, and those recommendations were more than anything about trying to put to bed some of the long-standing challenges that spin-outs have had.
Yeah.
And I went to a celebration of that one-year point since the publication of that review yesterday, and understand how much progress there has been nationally on this issue. One of the ways that it tried to address these problems is by pointing universities to some terms which have been drafted by an organization called 10U, because it was 10 universities, most of them in the UK, but not all of them. And that document, which is called the UCIT Guidelines, I think UCIT is University Spin-Out Investment Terms. It's about 50 pages long, and it's a template for what the spin-out terms should be. It's not entirely prescriptive, so most of these things are in bands. And not only does it describe what the terms should be, but it also places some time limits on how quickly universities should be able to respond to these situations. But I have to say it's still open to interpretation, because sometimes the delay is with the university, sometimes the delay is with the academics, sometimes it's because there's negotiation with investors. I think it's easy for people to always point the finger at the university. Sometimes it's a bit more complex than that. But I do recognize the problem which you've identified, and I think that it's a problem which is widely recognized, and we're taking a lot of action to try and remediate it, both at our university, where we really welcome this spin-out review, and at other universities across the UK. But I think I don't know, Phil, if you had anything you
I
want
was
to...
going to say, Dundee are already saying that we're the #1 spin-out university on the basis of this report.
Okay.
So, going back to being competitive and so on,
Yes.
and they're attracting investors and they're saying, very quick process. There's also this debate about the amount of equity universities have been asking. And one friend who's an investor said, yeah, they were very reasonable. Other places, I could not believe the amount of equity universities are still asking for.
So I think the equity question, which has been probably the most long-standing challenge for universities, I feel has been put to bed by the spin-out review, because it just says you should be at this level or you should be at this level, and there are not levels which investors should find objectionable, although of course there will be starting points for negotiation. I think no matter what level it is, there's going to be a negotiation. So it's not that there won't be any negotiations, but I think at least investors shouldn't come in and say, well, that's completely unreasonable.
Yeah.
So I hope so. Phil, was there anything which you thought should be added to that comment?
Yeah, we can add a bit about impact IP as well, actually. So a process which we're putting in place, set squared universities are putting in place, it's basically sort of template documents. The theory being is that they've all been agreed by lawyers and investors and the universities. So instead of negotiating every point in every agreement, you should be able to take a template document saying, this is broadly what we're going to agree, and then there'll be a few elements which you need to change or modify for your particular area. And again, this should all help speed up the process. Some of the delays in forming companies is the company itself, not them causing the delay, but it's what you're going to do and the structure of what you're going to do, and also putting in the processes of what it is, how you're going to do it. And that does take time. And we at the university are there to help you.
That's very helpful to share that, because some of my own business actually in the gaming industry, and when you go to the US, and when you go to the US, you have like the term called SAFE, which is one of the documents which is quite standard here. You've got standard ASAs, and it just means that you can just give the agreement. Very few times there's like, okay, this needs to be tweaked or changed, whatever, and then it's so much more straightforward doing that. And yeah, that sounds really good from a university point of view, because I think there's so much ambiguity beforehand when you're approaching this, and it's like, well, you don't want to sit there with a whole team of lawyers. Also, there's the cost of doing that as well. You know, here in the UK, we use like an online platform to set up the company, and it was all basically automatic, so all the agreements are already done. Like, that saved like 100 grand's worth of lawyer costs, which means we could start up a lot smaller amounts of money and just focus on raising investment for building the product and not spending it on lawyers forever. So yeah, it sounds really good.
It's perfect in terms of startup mentality, and organisations like Seed Legals and Vested have just done such an amazing job of driving the fact that why are you spending all this time, energy and money on the legals? If you'd spent it on the business, you might actually have something worth protecting.
Well, I think particularly because everything's changing so quickly,
Precisely.
it's like, have to get on top of it.
Thank you. Good question. Anyone else?
This is a bit of like an in the weeds kind of question, but I'd love to know a bit more about the sort of commercial side of CiteAb. Sort of like what's sold to the companies that buy the products? Like, are they like a raw data dump, or is it like market analysis or services? Like, how does that actually look?
Yeah. Do you want to take that, or shall I?
I can do that, don't worry. The most income is actually like, it's a data dump, so we provide a pay on a subscription basis, which again was one of the key things key decisions that really Dave pushed early on. The reason we got through the second year was because the first year sales renewed. But technically, yeah, we set up hosted tables or have an API, and companies subscribe to access. We let them do their analysis rather than, because it's then so flexible, because they can, especially with ever increasing data skills, AI tools, you can blend our data in with their own data and come to more informed decisions than they would make just using their own data, or even if we built a platform which was designed to answer one set of questions, they might come up with an entirely different set of questions. So that's how how 90% of what we do works.
There's a few other little kind of pieces that slot in, but they're all around the similar vein. So it might sound odd, but because this sounds very odd because you'd expect they'd have sales data, but a lot of companies don't actually know what their products are being used for. So, and then that's often because, maybe they've sold a vial of this antibody or whatever, but the lab 2 doors down has gone, you got any of that? Can we use it in our experiment? And then it worked, and we've got some left to use it. So there isn't a direct line of sight between you as the seller of a reagent with the ultimate use. But obviously, 9/10 of the marketing is, hey, look, our thing does this. Like, brilliant. So they are clamoring to find out who's using their products to do what, and especially what was it successful at doing. Because one of the beauties with these things is, or at least my understanding, and you probably can go larger on this, but you produce something, and then someone finds it's great at doing that thing over there, or it was brilliant in that thing over there. And so we were the first reliable source of who was doing what with what. So the companies were desperate to say, can you provide us a feed of that citation data? Can you tell us where our products are being used, please? Which was, I mean, again, that's the sort of indication that we were getting through the research into impact that really made us feel there was a big knowledge gap that we could help fill. We also have organisations, we don't let anybody pay to promote through the search engine because we want to remain impartial, but you can have extended profiles so that when someone clicks through to one of your products, it does explain a bit about your company, your ethics, your promotions, whatever else you want. So there are kind of upsells. There are a few different channels as well as just the straight data sales.
Yeah, and if you really like the tech, there's a web plugin as well. So for the use that Dave describes of literally just showing where this product is being used, as we provide a plugin, they can put it on the website, on their own website, and it'll just update.
Yes, they don't even need to take the data, and they just know that it'll be the most recent, here's what other people are doing.
And that, like Dave says, that knowledge of, because antibodies can be used in lots of different experiments, but they can also be used in different tissue types. So they're normally designed with human in mind because of, we're talking about preclinical research here, but what about veterinary disease? So the nice example I like is an antibody company with a dolphin researcher phoning them up and saying that they would like antibodies made specifically for dolphin. Well, the companies are never going to be able to do that, but the targets might be similar enough that some of their products will work, and we will find that they've been used in dolphin, and then other vets can use it. So it's just, all sorts of, like...
It's a useful tip for when you next take your dolphin to the vet.
So if you need dolphin antibodies, we can help you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I think we're getting near the end. Chris, can I just check, are there online questions, please?
It's a VAR check.
Thank you. This might be the last question. Given your knowledge of Bath and the city and the investors here and the high net worth individuals you mentioned, do you think Bath is ready to have a kind of philanthropic ventures fund? So, as you mentioned, David, the fund where Bristol was putting, and then they held on, and then lost a load. And full disclosure, I work in the advancement office at Bath, so I am a fundraiser. So this is something that's been on our mind for a long time. There are some universities in the UK that have done it, mostly in the US, but it's something that potentially could be really exciting. But do you think the appetite is there? Because we'd need to have enough people to put enough money in that would then go on to support more companies spinning out.
Yeah, I mean, I do. There are a couple of pieces. So first of all, if you look at Bath especially, right, you say, does the university have to do it? But the work that's gone over on the last couple of years with the Civic University Agreement, which is utterly groundbreaking in terms of the level of interplay and collaboration between the RUH and both universities and the council, and frankly sets a template for the Wessex Waters of this world. It shouldn't just be a university's obligation to create a fund for the city. It could go well beyond that, because there's some phenomenal interplays of research between universities and the RUH, especially in the medical space that we're talking about. So why aren't they both helping to create that? Putting that aside for a moment, my argument is that you don't necessarily need a lot of money to go in initially. What you need is some very smart investments initially to generate the more money. So actually, just start by saying we want to raise £500,000 and we're going to create £500,000 investments, but the 3 to 5 year vision for that is 3x return on each of those. Some will be big, some will go pop, but let's average it out and try and create a larger fund, which I won't go over again because we've covered it. But I don't think it necessarily means you need lots of people. Amazing if we can do so. the piece that I've always heard from the university and the balance, and again, just this is touching on the difference between civic mission and the university's kind of grand and glorious purpose, is the universities do have and hold huge responsibilities in terms of what they're there to do for the students, for their international reputation, for the research they conduct, and actually being part of a locality is something that I have seen over the years I've been in Bath. I was 2005 when I came to university here, but over that couple of decades, I've seen the engagement and, dare I say, love for the city do this over the time. And I'm sure that if you asked people behind the scenes, they'd say, yeah, it's been flat. But in terms of actually physically seeing the universities, again, I'd go beyond Bath here, Bath and Bath Spa, their actual being in the city and being there to help when they were needed has a visibility of up and downs. So I guess what I'm saying is we seem to be a bit of an up at the moment. So I'd capitalise on that, not just with the university, but with all of the partners, and say, hey, is there anything that we could do to continue to encourage it?
Great answer. Yeah, you got that one right. Thank you.
Thanks, good. It'll be 50p.
You'll get your share when the money comes. Chris, was there anything else? No. Okay, so it just remains for me to thank all of you as our audience, but particularly to thank our two speakers here today. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks. Thanks.